Great to see you.
Andy, a pleasure.
You having a good Davos?
Yeah, it's a good Davos, interesting Davos.
What do you think is different this time around? I mean, every year it's always both the same and a little different, right?
True.
So what's the different part this year?
Well, I would say this year, I think the narrative is harder to identify, Andy. I mean, in the past, we've had synchronized growth. We've had the world is falling apart. We've had movement towards transformation with technology, changing everything we do. This year, there's so much individual pockets of geopolitical issues or disruption across the world. Everyone's just trying to figure out really what's going on. So I find the narrative a little harder to define.
It's interesting because I guess in a way what you're saying is the world is becoming sort of atomized, right? Fractionalized, or like this little story here and this little story here, and everyone's sort of paying attention to the individual stories, be it Italy or Brexit and the U.S. and then China, and a lot of different stories, right?
It is, and you know what? They add up to a big story because there's so many of them going on that creates the uncertainty. But each one in himself, could be a whole discussion, whether it's Brexit or France or Italy or the U.S. shutdown or whatever it might be. It's kind of interesting.
You mentioned this uncertainty, and I want to ask you, what you're hearing from your customers and your clients when you're out there. And, this has been sort of a theme we've been hearing for a while. There's uncertainty, and yet, month after month there's uncertainty, but you got to go about your business, right? So how are people handling that?
Well said. What I say is you can't respond to every tweet or every news story. You've got to look at the underlying economic circumstances. And when you do, while we're definitely slowing and the risk to the downside is greater than last year when we sat here, we're still seeing relatively strong economies across the world compared over the last 10 years. I mean, we're seeing, for U.S., for example, you're hearing about a major slowdown. We've seen 5 quarters in a row of double-digit profit growth. That's not bad. We're seeing GDP growth of 2.5%, which is the second highest maybe in the last 10 years as opposed to last year. We're seeing confidence in consumers. We'll have a tremendous consumption season around Christmas. But you still get this feeling of talking ourselves into a recession or this uncertainty.
That is a phrase I've actually heard. You talk about a narrative. I've heard that a little bit this time around at Davos. Don't let us talk ourselves into a recession. And I think that's interesting because it speaks to confidence, though, right?
It does. It does. It absolutely does. And obviously confidence is a big factor in overall growth. There's no doubt in my mind that businesses generally are taking a little longer to make decisions. The trade issue is clearly weighing on how you set up your supply chain. We had massive tax reform in the United States. All companies could have immediately rushed to try and start changing their supply chain, but when you don't know where tariffs are going to be, it slows you down a little bit. You don't know if Brexit is going to happen and the pound is going to fall through the floor. You don't know what's going to happen in the rest of Europe. China's slowing much more precipitously, so what do you do there? How do you invest there? Their exports and imports are down. They all slow down decision making, but I don't think they're turning it into, I'm not going to invest anymore.
Now, you know the Washington, D.C. area very well, of course, and I want to ask you about the government shutdown in the United States. And, how's this thing going to get resolved? What's the impact? And is there going to be any kind of permanent impact? What is your thinking, Mark?
Well, good questions, all of them, and obviously we don't know. But I think that my guess is they're going to come back to the table when the pain gets too great. So right now, you're hearing it's a humanistic toll for sure. People in the area that I live in are feeling it. You can see it. People aren't getting paychecks. That being said, as far as the overall GDP numbers, it's really not at this point having a major impact. Another several weeks or more, it could start to have a real impact. What we are seeing is it's harder to get IPOs through the SEC. We're going to have the IRS trying to develop the tax refunds is going to maybe be a little slower. So I think you're going to see some things like that. But generally, it's the confidence that we were just talking about that's damaged by people looking at a government. One of the most democratic and seasoned governments in the world can't operate, can't function. And what's this mean for the next 2 years in terms of policy? That's, I think, the biggest weight on the economy.
Now, you were on a panel of CEOs that advised or worked with the president. I think that got disbanded or It doesn't exist anymore. And I'm wondering what you would, I don't know if you still talk to President Trump or if you did, what you would tell him, how would you counsel him?
Well, I firmly believe, you and I have talked about this before, that it's better to be in the room sharing your expertise and your opinion than outside the room complaining. So if I had the opportunity, I would say, listen, for the good of the country, certainly for the good of your policy, for the good of the remainder of your term, work with the Democrats. But I would also be saying the same thing to the Democrats for the the good of your new leadership coming in, hitting the ground running, building confidence in the U.S. economy to keep the pro-growth that we've had, these incredible job numbers that we've had. You've got to figure out how to work together better and get to the table and figure this out.
What's the most important part of EY going forward? Where are you seeing growth, and what is the company going to be focusing on?
So the good news is across all of our businesses, Andy, we're doing extremely well. So we're in the audit business, of course. We're in the consulting business. We're in the transaction business. And when you look at on the tax business, of course, when you look at all of them, there's great demand across the world, and frankly, uncertainty helps that. But our transaction business is growing the fastest. No matter whether things are going good or bad, everyone has to transform. You either need to synergize and get lower costs, or you need to capitalize on growth. And so we're seeing a lot of emphasis still on transactions, growing 14% a year, which is incredible. Our consulting business, when you look at cyber and digital and data, it's growing double digits as well, and that's now a $10 billion business. So we're seeing great demand. And the developing markets, which have been a little bit more in turmoil, are still growing faster than the developed markets, but we're seeing an uptick in the developed markets as well.
All right, you're stepping down as chief executive in July, and I want to ask you a couple questions about that. I talked to your successor, the next CEO, Carmine DeCibio. He was great. First off, what are your thoughts about your time as CEO at EY?
It's one of the most humbling and exceptional experiences I could ever have asked for, to have the opportunity to work with incredible people all around the world, incredible governments across the world, and certainly the role we play in serving the capital markets is incredibly important. So I'm thrilled. We added 100,000 people over the period I've been there in the last 7 years. We've had 50% increase in revenue. We've transformed ourselves to now we have 2,000 robots in addition to the people we've hired, and we're getting into all new types of businesses. But what I really love is seeing the people that we're bringing in every day and training them to succeed at EY or to go into government or somewhere else and succeed. And it makes you really proud when you see the people you work with do well.
All right, speaking of jobs, what's next for you? Or maybe a beach.
Are you hiring?
You don't want to get in this business. You don't want to be in the media business necessarily, Mark. But what's next for you? A government job? Would you do that? Or what are you thinking? What's your thoughts?
I haven't thought yet. So I'm still in my role for another 6 months. So July 1, I actually am out, and then I'll stay at EY for another 6 months to help with transition. And so December, I'll be out of EY, and I'll be doing something else. So I'm not going to sit on a beach for sure. My wife wouldn't let me do that. I'd probably be home too much after my travel for the last 10 years. But I want to do things that still around education, around helping the income inequality issue. I spent a lot of time around. I'm very big, as you know, in inclusive capitalism and making sure that we help companies look at their non-financial metrics as well as the financial. I'll stay in that. So I'll find something. And government, as you know, I did work for 2 presidents and 2 different senators. I really believe government does a great thing, even though right now it doesn't always feel that way. I think it's incredibly important. So maybe you never say never to anything.
We look forward to seeing where you land. Mark Weinberger, CEO of EY, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Andy.